So, dobrý večer, good evening. I'm Miroslav, director of the Czech Center. You can see we have such a distinguished panel here, sitting here right on time, 7:00. We're still expecting a few more people because we are absolutely packed. There is a waiting list, so I think some people might be joining us. But welcome at I think what's going to be quite interesting evening, which is part of the series on the Czech graphic identity, which we have launched about 2 months ago, exhibition at the Czech Vitrinka Gallery and Bouda Gallery. So if you have not seen that, please do so. We're still going to have it here for a few more weeks before it will be off to Asia, Taiwan, Japan, and some other countries. We also have been in this very place screening the film about the Czech graphic identity, and today we're going to be talking about some of the most well-known personalities that clearly influenced the graphic design, not only the Czechoslovakia or the Czech, but around the globe. And I'd just like to share that one of the very successful exhibitions which I had the opportunity to see was on the Czech modernism at the Guggenheim in New York. Some of you might know Thomas Messer, who was, I think, his life dream to bring Czech modernism to Guggenheim, and after almost 20 years of very hard work, he succeeded in early 90s, I believe, of the past century. Also, maybe 25 years ago in New York, the great gallery, art gallery, which is part of the NYU, there was also a very well received exhibition, Dreams and Disillusion, around Karel Teige and some other surrealists coming from Czechoslovakia. And most recently, just to illustrate that these names which you can see, Mucha, Teige, and others, are not only a history in the past, but they really do inspire our present times. I just came back from Osaka, from Japan, and part of the inspiration for the Czech pavilion is Alphonse Mucha, the unfinished triptych, The Three Ages, and it's wonderful artistic presentations of that and very well received with the Japanese public. And of course, we're going to be talking about Alphonse Mucha among others here this evening. So without any further ado, as we have such a strong panelists here, I'll stop right now. But before I'll do so, I would like to introduce the chair of the panel, John Walters, who is the co-owner and editor of the magazine I, the International Review of the Graphic Design, among others. So welcome once again. Enjoy the evening. John, the floor is yours.
It's good to see such a good turnout. I believe there's a few others still struggling to get here, but it won't matter if they miss what I'm about to say, because I'm really here as the ringmaster. I'm not an expert in any of the design we're about to see, so I've got my notebook to take notes. iMagazine is about, one of its main pillars is contemporary graphic design, but a very important pillar is design history, graphic design history, and the way that the history of graphic design is very much rooted in 20th century modernism, international modernism, and some of the most important people did stem from the Czechoslovakia, as we'll see. We're also a magazine of design and visual culture, and the whole history of communication design dating back to the revolutions in printing at the turn of the 20th century, and posters, and we also embrace photography and illustration. So in fact, all four of the subjects we're going to hear about tonight are very relevant to the design that we show and critique and talk about within the pages of iMagazine. There are some articles relevant to this on our website, imagazine.com. There's two long articles about Teige and about Sutnar. Anyway, I'd better begin. We're going to hear at the very end from Lukáš talking about Šašek. We're going to hear from my old friend Adrian Shaughnessy talking about Ladislav Sutnar. We're going to hear from Peter Zusi to talk about Teige. And first of all, we're very pleased to have Tomoko Sato talking about Mucha. Welcome. Please, a big hand for Tomoko.
Thank you. I'm delighted to participate in this great event. Especially, this is very unusual from my point of view, placing Mucha, more historical figure, in the context of the development of modern graphic art in Czechoslovakia and Czech Republic. So, first slide I am showing here is Mucha himself, 1896, very handsome, cool, and he's in the middle of creating life-size poster design. And also I wanted to show actual Mucha's word. Exterior form is a language, composition is the artist's speech. So this is keynote of today's presentation. And indeed, his graphic style, which is quite often described as visual language. And how actually this visual language was developed, in what kind of context, and how actually it is related to today's popularity. That's something I would like to share with you. Who is Mucha? I think a large majority of people here familiar with Mucha's name, as well as very famous Art Nouveau posters produced in Paris mainly. So obviously his well-known tag is Master of Art Nouveau. And this poster, Gismonda, produced in 1894, however, appeared in Paris streets 1895, New Year's Day. Indeed, this year is the 130th anniversary of appearance of this poster, which impacted hugely the idea of poster art at such time. Now, what is so different in comparison to other posters at the time by Scherer or Toulouse-Lautrec? This is, first of all, format is different, and the quality of line work, which becomes highly praised by followers, and still it is an important component of his art. So now, Master of Art Nouveau, Mucha. And at the same time, which is slightly lesser known, but Mucha was a visionary. For him, working for his nation, independence, is the most important as an artist mission. And as I am showing here, this is a detail of the first canvas, the famous the Slav-epic. 20 canvases. Now actually you can see in the Moravsky Krumlov Castle, and this was a sort of masterpiece he regarded, and expression of history of Slavonic people he produced in order to inspire Slavonic solidarity for the independence, and also after that eternal peace, which unfortunately did not continue. Now, several elements I would like to talk about. First of all, maybe this is very little known, but Mucha was a really meticulous theorist. And his design, for instance, Biscuit Lefebvre Utile, 1896, immediately after his international debut, and also the following year. For instance, as you can see from this analysis, I actually made a diagram out of this. Seducing lines, curves, circles, guiding the viewer's eye, and inducing a psychological impact on the viewer. Please read Mucha's own words. They were taken from his theory book, which actually he developed while he was teaching in America, based on his experience dwelling in Paris for 5 years. If we look at Biscuit Utile, first of all, the girl is looking at you, and therefore, intuitively, your eye is drawn into it. And the same kind of trick is made with La Trappistine. This time, it is helped by circular motif. Indeed, he was scientifically experimenting. He was in the circle of scientists, psychologists as well as astronomers, but they were all part of Theosophical Society. And they developed together curving lines and also concentrated circles would draw your attention. So this kind of scientific idea he meticulously used. What is interesting is La Trappistine. Your eyes drawn to girl's face. She is looking down, but this movement is emphasized by circular motif. And her hair, straight line, going down, it touches the table which carries La Trappistine. This is a liquor. So this is actually, in fact, he is advertising. However, as you can see, this is not a sort of a big motif in the composition. This kind of innovative composition, later on, we called Le Style Mucha. As I said, this idea of optical illusion and psychological impact, which was the most important aspect of his design. So behind the facade of very attractive ladies, all idealized, and the reason why he idealized these faces is not because of his interest in today's pin-up style girls or anything. This is actually, again, very much calculated, based on meticulous calculation, what is the most beautiful ratio, even applied for faces. And for instance, Monaco Monte Carlo, this is tourist advertising, and recently developed Monaco Monte Carlo railway line. This is the idea. However, in fact, you would expect families or tourists or in the station, that kind of image could be average at that time. However, what he was actually saying here is a sort of more psychological impact, that is an implication of pleasure, of tourism, with a combination of circular motifs, with the stalks of beautiful flowers and the birds, like lifting up your psychological status, and the girl is looking into the ear with a sort of dreamy face, imagining nice experience in Monte Carlo. So this kind of implication, not direct description, and also the use of curved lines effectively drawing your attention, and also guiding your eye to other decorative motifs. Each of them actually have all the meanings. For instance, if you look at the art, dance, oh, this is not dance, I'm sorry, this is actually a painting, it is gold. Now, usually, the painting in all the master's piece depicted with goddess-like figure holding a brush and easel and that kind of setting. However, no. What he really wanted to show was the, again, psychological, emotional feeling when human encountered with a beautiful color, in this case, the red flower. Now, behind her, there are, in fact, concentrated circles created, formed with rainbows. And also the pattern of clouds. And if you look at very carefully, the leaves of the flower actually carry raindrops. So altogether, you are supposed to associate all these familiar motifs, but with the help of composition. This is after the rain. And after the rain, colors are vivid and beautiful. And this is indeed the emotion artists would experience, artist inspiration. So that is his theme. So now I am summarizing all the key elements of his style. So, as I said, beauty, beautiful face. It is all about harmonious composition as well as proportions learned from nature. Now I'm showing here studies of forms from nature, analysis of their proportions. They are from our archives. Mucha produced so many drawings as well as cut out from art books as well as encyclopedia, and pasting up, calculating meticulously. And when he also looked at all the master paintings books, according to our record, he had at least 150 or 200 books bought in America, antique bookshop, again, calculating meticulously, and whatever actually he thought beautiful, analyzing with figures and proportion, and then he came up with very particular conclusion. Whatever happens, 2 to 3, his golden ratio, and also circular motif, and especially the use of harmonious line, and what he thought, according to his experiment, even using medium and consciousness, humans actually feel comfortable, happy, when they look at circular or gently curling forms. So out of this, I would like to draw your attention to so-called Q formula. And especially, this Q formula will have a strong impact upon today's contemporary graphic designers' as proved by so many rock posters, psychedelic designs, and manga artists, comic artists, you will see this kind of repetition. Now, Q formula, as you can see, made of seated or standing figure, and in front of the circular motif, always behind, you will see nature or beautiful background, and the figure, most of the times female, clothing actually make interesting pattern with tail, which all together, O and tail, making Q. And this name was made by Brian Reed when he did most influential Mucha exhibition in London at the V&A 1963, and that was indeed the starting point of Mucha boom. Now, this is the final slide. I want to recap. His experiment with lines and drawings, and also effective way of reading eyes, as you can see, his own drawing, bottom left corner. This is one of many sketches we have. And based on that, I actually tried to make analysis of the final canvas of the Belle Époque. Now, this is actually very similar to what he was actually considering, experimenting with lines long time before. And you can see the theme itself is a celebration of Czech and Slavonic people's independence after the First World War. But the structure is straight line going up, and that figure, that straight line, upward line is going to the youth. He is representing newly created Czechoslovakia, and he is surrounded by 4 key periods represented by color. And this period is coming from ancient period to golden age of Czech Renaissance to oppressive period and Austro-Hungarian Empire, and even other black aspect showing oppressive invasion from other nations. So it is surrounding this straight line, and this straight line going up. So this kind of idea of composition, clearly he developed from his experiment in Paris in order to produce meaningful composition, in order to communicate with the public. So, from my point of view, Mucha's Paris period was indeed experiment laboratory in order to show what he wanted to communicate with not only Czech people, but also Slavonic friends, nations, and eventually humanity, bridging people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tomoko. If you have your seat, and now to very yes, so many years later, but a very different aesthetic world. Karel Teige, graphic design, Peter Zusi from University College. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Przemysl, to Renata, and to the Czech Center for organizing this and for inviting me. The interesting thing is Teige actually is not that much later. I mean, if we think about those last images that we were shown, they're from the 1920s. That's the period I'm going to be talking about. And as you'll see, it's very, very different vision. So Karel Teige is certainly one of the most important figures in 20th century Czech graphic design. But he's also much more than that. He's arguably the most important single figure in the interwar Czechoslovak avant-garde as a whole. I say arguably because every so often one or another scholar points out that Teige has been too much the focus of histories of the interwar avant-garde, that many other figures have had their own contributions and significance overshadowed by the attention devoted to Teige and the artist group for which he was the theoretician and main spokesperson, Devětsil. To an extent, they're right, as Devětsil has truly often been treated as if it was the Czechoslovak avant-garde tout court. And there were indeed other significant groups and voices at the time. Further, even within Devětsil, there were figures whose achievements in particular fields or genres were arguably more remarkable. The poetry of Vítězslav Nezval, for example, or the paintings of Toyen, or even perhaps the graphic design of Ladislav Sutnar, about whom we'll be hearing more shortly. But no other figure comes even close to Teige as a thinker of the entire range of avant-garde artistic and literary practice, from poetry to painting to architecture to drama to film and to graphic design. Teige's attempt to construct a unified theoretical framework for all of these disparate practices is the source of his unique significance, not only for Czechoslovak, but indeed for the European avant-garde as a whole. So before we can look more closely at Teige's work as a graphic designer, we need to know a little bit about the theoretical framework he developed, to which so many other artists and writers in the 20s and 30s made explicit or implicit reference. So in the early 1920s, he became famous for promulgating a double program, or perhaps better, an artistic program that was stretched taut between two poles, constructivism and poetism. Constructivism was at that time emerging as a major credo in various centers across Europe, most prominently in Holland, Berlin, and Moscow. So here Teige was joining forces with a larger European movement. Architecture was at the heart of the constructivist project, which called for ruthless rationality, functionality, and the elimination of any decoration of any sort, regarded as a sign of waste and even moral decline. Here, what I'm showing you, the 1925 Prague Trade Fair building is a major example of the influence that constructivism, largely in Teige's version, had in Czechoslovakia. No less a figure that Le Corbusier pronounced, "When I examined the Trade Fair Palace, I understood how I should create large buildings." This constructivist rationalism was the source of Teige's greatest international fame in the interwar period. But in Czechoslovakia, he was equally known for the other pole of his program, something he called poetism. Often labeled Czech culture's most original contribution to the spectrum of European avant-garde movements, poetism proclaimed and celebrated the ludic spontaneity of modern life, drawing inspiration from mass cultural forms such as film, jazz, and circuses, and even from activities such as tourism, athletics, and gastronomy. It celebrated irrationality, carefree happiness, what Teige called the art of wasting time. Now, it is quite obvious that constructivism and poetism are in many ways direct opposites, and commentators from Teige's day down to our own have been quick to charge him with sheer self-contradiction, or with a desire to have his cake and eat it too. I certainly would not want to deny the obvious tension between these ideals, and neither would Teige for that matter. But I would like to suggest that the claim for an overlap here is one that Teige makes in thought-provoking ways. In one of his more striking metaphors for how he understood the relation between constructivist rationalism and poetist irrationalism, Teige wrote, quote, "It is in the interest of life for the calculations of engineers and thinkers to be rational. However, every calculation rationalizes irrationality only to a few decimal places. The calculation of every machine contains the symbol pi. the irrational number, end quote. It is Teige's graphic work that perhaps illustrates most clearly how he felt these ideals could be combined in practice. Take, for example, the book cover Teige designed for Konstantin Bibel's 1928 verse collection, Zlom, Rupture. Marked by the clean, simple lines favored by constructivist architects, the cover design forgoes any sense of illustrating the book, which illustrations are something Teige decried as mere decoration. And instead, this cover delineates a structure for the page as a whole, dividing the field into discrete, balanced areas with separate functions: title, author's name, edge of page, center of attention, and so on. If this seems severe, however, like not too much fun, well, then one need only open the book to find Teige's more playful constructivist collage. Here, Teige takes the same pared down minimalist design features from the cover and uses them to construct an abstract poem, an abstract picture, one might say, which is suggestive in various ways. Is that a graveyard over on the right? Are those waves on an ocean under a starlit sky? Or is this some sort of devilish mathematical equation with no solution? He does all this without having any literal representational content. Another way that Teige's graphic work embodied his theoretical principles was in the way they attempt to demonstrate the unity of various genres, media, and artistic practices. Perhaps no work embodies this as clearly as the publication that has become one of the most iconic products of the interwar Czechoslovak avant-garde, the multimedia book Abeceda, Alphabet. And one of these illustrations is even on the publicity poster for this event. This extraordinary volume brought together 4 creative talents, each contributing through a different medium. Short poems by Nezval, one for each letter of the alphabet, though I haven't included them in the illustrations here, were interpreted in movement by Milcha Majerova, a modern dancer who had studied with Rudolf Laban and brought a number of his ideas to the project. Her movements were then photographed by Karel M. Paspa, and finally, this was all set into typo-photo designs by Teige. Abeceda thus directly confronts the reader/viewer with an overlay of different media, challenging the interpreter to make sense of their interactions. Perhaps even more radical in its attempt to integrate visual and verbal modes of communication was the genre Teige largely invented, though he was clearly inspired by Dadaist collage and photomontage, which he called the picture poem, obrazová báseň. These images aim to provide a non-linguistic narrative in visual form, a literal poem without words. The image on the right, titled Greetings from My Journey, Pozdrav z cesty, can in fact be understood as offering instructions in how one is supposed to read a picture poem. In this case, the description of a marvelous journey. And I'll just outline a little bit how I sort of read this, which is that one's eye is first attracted by that large red circle at the upper left, which is inviting us to read this literally as if it's words on a page. The disc, that sort of red disc, was a very important design element for Teige. He used it over and over. I have some other images I'll show you. And it generally for him was an indication of a kind of abstract, strong experience, an impression that didn't need to be sort of spelled out, but that made a real effect on one. If we then continue to the next, as it were, sentence in this poem, that picture of the lovely mountain town, we might say, oh, well, that's the experience that he's talking about. That's the strong sort of, you turn a corner and there's that magnificent view. Then we're invited, our eye slides down from the upper right to the bottom left, and we see these 2 images of a kind of holistic image of this journey. One is the nighttime sky one looks up to, maybe lying on the beach in the south of France. The other is the actual map, where we can see that the red color of the disc up at the top has been spread out, showing the entire journey, but at the same time not packing that same visceral punch that the disc does. Then our bottom verse at the lower part of the image. On the left, another red disc. And yet look at how sort of meager an imitation it is of the original one. This is the message home, and it's a secondary experience. It's not nearly as sort of forceful as the original experience. But that's all we have. So in a way, this picture poem can be understood as a sort of way of teaching us how we should be reading this. So my final point that I want to raise is that in the 1930s, Teige's dual program shifted. He spoke from that time not about constructivism and poetism, but of surrealism and functionalism. The new terminology entailed many of the same paradoxical dynamics we've touched upon already, though Teige's graphic production took on some new forms, which I have only time to show you a couple of images, though I'll be happy to go back and maybe we can talk about these in the discussion, but I'm going to go fairly quickly through these now. So his book cover designs in the this is just some of those discs. You can see these are covers for journals and books that Teige did, and you can get a sense of just how commonly and often he used that disc. So here, Teige's book designs in the 1930s became more disjointed, more collage-like, taking representational images, but using them as semi-abstract design elements. Then, shortly before the war, Teige began making collages in a surrealist idiom, artworks that he continued to produce until the end of his life in 1951, though he never published or displayed these publicly. Teige's final years were depressing. Not only had the war taken quite a toll on him emotionally, but his disillusion with the world ran even deeper. Despite having been an ardent Marxist his entire life, he had recognized and spoken out against Stalinist injustice in the 1930s. The Communist Party in Czechoslovakia neither forgot nor forgave this after coming to full power in 1948. And communist cultural apparatchiks made of Teige a highly visible pariah, portraying him as the embodiment of decadent bourgeois modernism, and even coining the term Teigeese, Teigovština, to designate a cultural vocabulary they aimed to smear and eliminate. On October 1st, 1951, in the midst of a coordinated campaign against him, Teige died of a heart attack. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very pleased to introduce you to Adrian Shaughnessy to talk about Ladislav Sutnar.
Thank you, John. Well, after two very scholarly presentations, this is going to be more of a fanboy presentation. My subject, Ladislav Sutnar, I absolutely love, and I want to make the case that I often hear this phrase, not in John's wonderful publication, but I often hear this phrase, a design polymath. And I think, what does that mean? And sometimes it refers to, often it refers to someone who's designed a rather nice logo and designed an exhibition stand. And I think, does that qualify? But I want to make the case that I think in Sutnar's case, we can call him a design polymath. So even with a cursory look at his huge body of work, it reveals the ease and conviction with which he moved amongst various design disciplines. And I'm just going to take you on a little journey through the various things that he did. He made toys, beautiful toys, vividly coloured, and as you can see, obviously handmade. Puppets, he was a keen puppeteer, made beautiful puppets. Furniture, designed furniture. He was aware of the Bauhaus. I think actually he visited the Bauhaus, but you could see a Bauhaus influence. Signage. Wonderful, wonderful graphic signage for all sorts of institutions. Advertising, I could have shown 1,000 adverts. He was incredibly prolific, wonderful, brilliant, vivid adverts for various products. Glassware, look at that. I mean, it's just delightful, beautifully made, beautifully photographed. Stage sets, when in his early days in Czechoslovakia, he designed stage sets. Exhibitions, he designed many exhibitions. Interiors, this I think is the KLM office, I think in New York. And of course, books. Hundreds and hundreds of really wonderful, vivid, expressive book covers. And we can see a link to Teige in his book design. Magazines, all sorts of subject matter. Typographic expression of all kinds, very, very vividly illustrative use of typography. Here's some more examples. I mean, we can see wonderfully expressive. And I suppose what today we would call branding. This was a famous branding job he did. He was also the author of important books. Not that one. We'll come back. We'll come back to that. He was the author of a number of important books. And I think, again, if we're going to make this claim for polymathy, then we have to accept that he was also, like Teige, was also a theorist. He was interested in, perhaps more interested in the practical side of being a designer than the purely theoretical. But he was very, very interested in and wrote many, many books on the subject. This is an example of information design. He has some claim to be one of the godfathers of information design. This was when he went to the US. I'll briefly just describe his journey in a minute, but he did wonderful, wonderful work in information design. And often he's held up with another emigre, Will Burton. And Burton was a very interesting character, German. Like Sutnar, found himself in America. The reason Burton, if I can just deviate for a second, the reason Burton went to America was he got a call one day, working in Germany, got a call one day from someone called Goebbels. And Goebbels said, Herr Burton, I'd like you to become the creative director of the Nazi Party. And Burton was smart enough to say, oh yes, that's a great idea, thanks very much. Give me a few days to sort myself out. And that night he left, with his Jewish wife, left for America. And Steve Heller, who I'm going to quote in a minute, Steve Heller makes the point that perhaps these two luminaries of information design, because the English language wasn't their first language, perhaps that forced a sort of approach to information design that was non-linguistic, but we can see. So, Sutnar was born in 1897, and he was part of that post-war generation, post-World War I generation of artists and designers who pioneered a vision of the world that was rooted in the avant-garde and dedicated to new freedoms and the idea of democracy. As with so many of his contemporaries in art and design, Sutnar saw the future as a fusion of art, science and technology, and factors that can always be seen in his work. And nowhere is this more evident than his pioneering work in information design. In 1938, he was commissioned to design the exhibition, the Czech exhibition at the 1939 New York World's Fair, called The World of Tomorrow. And he didn't design the building, but he designed the contents. Hitler's invasion of, he was actually sent to take all the exhibits back because of the threat of the beginnings of the Second World War. But he found that because Hitler had invaded Czechoslovakia, he couldn't go back, and that's why he ended up staying in America. I mentioned Stephen Heller. Stephen Heller's written a lot about Sutnar. I think he did the eye piece, didn't he, John? He wrote a really wonderful long piece in one of the early editions of Eye. And he said Sutnar was able to inject visual excitement into the most routine material without impinging upon accessibility. Whilst his basic structure was decidedly rational, his use of juxtapositions, scale, and colour was rooted in abstraction. And I think that for me really captures what's so good and interesting about Sutnar's work. Sutnar's on record as saying that he wanted to make design that would appeal to plumbers without cheapening aesthetic standards, but which nevertheless communicated in a clear and precise manner. Two areas in which Sutnar made a lasting contribution to graphic expression and comprehension can be found in two quotidian projects. Firstly, in his adoption of, these are the, I missed a bit, sorry. These are the books, or some of the books that he wrote on the theory of, and the practice, and I emphasize practice more than theory of design. He, as I said, he was responsible for two very, very major, perfectly ordinary developments in graphic expression. The first one is what we see here, was the double page spread. Now, he may not have been the first, but he certainly made a powerful, powerful case for using the double page spread as a way of conveying information, as a way of conveying knowledge and understanding. Prior to that, the single page was the frame that designers tended to use. And in 1964, he designed the phone number, structure, and directory for American telephone and the telegraph bell system. And he did this in a very simple way. He simply put brackets around the area code. Very simple thing, but actually it transformed the way people used and understood numbers. Now, I couldn't find, the internet's supposed to contain everything that we need, but I couldn't find an example of the bell, not even in Steve's article. But this is, I think this is Northern Ireland, I think. But even they're using it. That simple, easy to understand technique for imparting information. So for me, this is what distinguishes Sutnar from other designers. This ability to work, I showed earlier, let's go back quickly, I showed a piece of, after he found, when he was in America, he suddenly found that he wasn't in demand, he wasn't getting any work. And so he started to make these rather strange paintings. They have a strong erotic element to them, but they're incredibly graphic and powerful. He decided that he just simply wasn't getting any work, and so he threw himself into these paintings. But the case I want to make for Sutnar is that there are hundreds of designers, millions of designers, who can do the practical bit. You can do it brilliantly. The practical application of graphic design. And there's other designers, perhaps few of them, who can do the hyper-expressive stuff, the sort of stuff perhaps we've seen with Mucha. But very few people, very few practitioners can do both. And I believe very strongly that Sutnar was an example of someone who could do both. So, Ladislav Sutnar, design polymath.
Miroslav Šašek. He's author of one of the most successful non-fiction illustrated series, but until very recently he was completely unknown in his home country. So why is that? And also why I'm talking about children's book illustrator at a graphic design meeting. I will explain. But I should start by thanking the Czech Center for giving me amazing opportunity to buy even more books of Miroslav Šašek. I have quite a few now. So I first came across him when I was working on my own book, Modern London, and I stumbled upon this amazing book, and I saw his name, Šašek, and quite often when I see some name which sounds Czech, I just Google it, and I found out that he not only is Czech, but he also studied at the exactly same course in architecture in Prague as I did. I found out that he was illustrating lots of books during the war and after the war. But in 1948, when the the Communist Party took over, actually his clients, some of them went to prison. So he was he was out of job perfectly. So he stayed in Paris, where he was at the moment, and his citizenship was revoked, so he became stateless. He started to work for Radio Free Europe. He was designing these illustrated satirical propaganda leaflets, which were sent over the border in these kind of primitive balloons, hoping that they will spread somewhere and someone will pick it up and fight communism. But he was, in his mind, he was working on this kind of concept of children's guidebook. For 10 years he was on it, until finally in 1959 he found a publisher. He published it and became a huge success. And just this shows kind of his development of his style over the 10 years. It's clear that he became much more avant-garde. He was in Paris, he got inspired. The composition is pretty much the same, but the illustration style is just so different and so fresh and modern. And he was not only architect, but he was also graphic designer, commercial graphic designer. So all the layouts were amazingly done. And after first modern Paris, he made modern London, modern Rome. His fourth book, Modern New York, is perfect example of the way he presented the cities. So as an architect, he was able to do this amazing cityscape, kind of, the whole city, which is simplified, but at the same time, if you would compare this with the actual, contemporary photo, you could, it's precise. I see those photos of 1960s New York, and the ads are just exactly the same. And then he would zoom into these kind of smaller everyday things, from vending machines, mailboxes, things which we don't really realize they are there, but he recorded them in such detail. You just see all the signs and everything is so, so perfect. And same for, this is when he went to see kind of the Cape Canaveral. It was called Cape Kennedy back then, I think. Most of these places are no longer there, but he recorded them in such detail. And he would spend months. This is actual place in Texas, which it came online recently. People were saying oh, this is funny thing, it can't be real, but someone dug up this old photo, it is real. And he could come to these kind of little gems because he would spend months in every city and just spend the whole day painting, in the streets and just chatting with people. And he didn't use photography, he didn't do any of that, so he spent something over 10 years traveling across the world and doing this amazing work. He also believed that children are really, how to put this, they are really harsh critics. They're really oriented in detail. So he was just making sure that he does everything correctly. Even the languages, even the signs, he would, had no idea what they say. He would spend the whole day just perfecting these characters. And then he would ask locals, does it make sense? And they would be like, oh, this is terrible. But, or when he done a book about Israel, when he was, drawing the Hebrew signs from left to right, and everyone was laughing at him like, you did it the wrong way. So he believed children should not be, censored. They should just like see the world as it is. So in This is Washington DC, he included the JFK assassination scene, including the circle. This is where the shooter was. It's interesting. And This is Israel, he wanted to include Israeli military checkpoint, which obviously didn't go through. And in the 70s, the books suddenly kind of started to go out of fashion. They were seen as kind of too naive. The illustration style was just not there. It wasn't in fashion anymore. And he dies kind of forgotten in 1980. But fashion comes back. So, it's a circle. So in 2004, recently, it's like this is gold. They reprint everything, and it's a huge success. And as always, there's something with huge success. There are copycats who are trying to ride a wave. So we get another This is Paris coming out. Crazy. But most importantly, in 2013, 54 years after this book being published, it comes in Czech language. Baobab is amazing Czech publisher who reissued the whole edition, and I love this little detail when they just added the diacritics on his name, which they were always omitted on all the international editions. This is something on a personal note. My new book now has the same publisher as Šašek, so that's great honor. I just wish they would sell as well as his. And to end, the Project Identity made this amazing kind of competition for the best Czech book ever made, and This is London made it into top 10, which is brilliant. And if you want to find out more, there are these two books which were a source of this talk, and I can recommend them. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lucas. I want to kick off our discussion by talking about this thing which I think is in common with many of the subjects we've talked about, which is just being forgotten in their lifetime and then discovered later. And to start with you, Lucas, it seems like it was the case that he was never known about in Czechoslovakia or now the Czech Republic until the Rizzoli books came out. Is that correct?
He was actually kind of actively banished from the Czech kind of knowledge, because not only he was emigre, but he was successful emigre who made it, in the West. So that's kind of a big.
So it's almost the reverse. He was to be ignored because he'd been successful.
Because he showed that people from that country can make it outside and be super successful. Plus, he illustrated anti-communist leaflets, and didn't help as well.
Okay. To go on to Adrian, we know that in the later years of his life, Sutnar sort of lost clients and just did his own thing, and then died sort of semi-forgotten. But when do you date the revival of interest in? Where do you date the revival of interest in Sutnar?
That's an interesting question. I certainly think Steve and I Magazine did their bit. I think that article.
That was in the 90s.
Yeah, it would be in the 90s. And I think there's been a slow revival over the years of an interest in the history of graphic design. I think it's something that surprised people, because tutors always used to tell their students, oh, you should look at the history, you should understand the history. And students, no, I just want to know what's cool and current. But since, I suppose since the 90s, there has been this interest. And you can see it in the best barometer for it is publishing. You can now get, there's two wonderful Sutnar books. I showed pages from both of them actually. Lars Muller has published Design in Action, which was a really thorough treatise on how to use graphic design. And then there's another one, I think it's From Prague to New York, which Hella writes the introduction for. These really important books. And I just think they arrived at a time when there was an appetite, there was a hunger, and people could see that this work really stood up. It was the sort of work that people want to do now. You showed a really great example of the Paris covers. You know, if you're a graphic designer, there's no question which one you like. But the publishing norms dictate that it's the second one that goes.
I think also the interest and the importance of information design and the use of the parentheses in organising numbers and directories. That's something that became very current. And I remember Steve Heller writing that Sutnar's name wasn't really attached to the telephone directory because it was such a universal thing.
Yeah.
No one thought.
I couldn't find. I had to use a Northern Ireland telephone directory because I couldn't find an example of the Bell system. But yeah, he did it and was unrecognised for it.
Peter, as you described it, Teige had a kind of real explosion of activity when he was still quite a young man, and but was that remembered in the post-war era? I mean, he was denounced within his own country. Did someone carry the flame from elsewhere after that?
During the 50s, he was very much suppressed, sort of wiped out of the official histories of the interwar period. During sort of deep dark Czechoslovak Stalinism, and then in the 60s, in the years leading up to the Prague Spring, there were a number of, for the most part, younger scholars who effectively took up Teige as a way of kind of criticizing the status quo in terms of cultural politics, but still dealing with a figure who was an avowed Marxist and thus, in some sense, represented what I think a lot of people felt was, a form of Marxism that was suppressed and crushed. So in the 60s, you have the big 3-volume critical edition of his writings, which is an extraordinary achievement. Volume 1 comes out in 1966. Volume 2 comes out in the end of 68. A couple of those got out, and then the entire print run was destroyed after the Soviet Pact invasion. Volume 3 comes out in the mid-90s. That's how long it takes. So that gives you a sense of just the incredible sort of adventures, as it were, of these people's afterlives.
Tomiko, to something you mentioned right at the end of your talk was the revival of interest in Mucha, which you date to the V&A exhibition.
That is right, 1963.
So was he still remembered or thought of in the period up to that? Or?
Very little. Mm-hmm. In fact, he left Paris almost permanently in 1906. And he disappeared, and he was in America. So of course, in America, he had a sort of a certain reputation. But once he returned to his country in 1910, with a strong decision to produce the Slav epic, 20 canvases, he was almost confining himself into Wirok Castle. Just very little communication and activities with Paris and all other so-called Western Bloc countries. But as a result, Mucha, while he was so famous during the Belle Époque period and Art Nouveau, unfortunately, Mucha research completely stopped, forgotten by Western European or American.
And can you just say a little bit about the Mucha Foundation? when does that date to?
In fact, the best person is Mrs. Mucha here. However, if I say 1992.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1993, I was very much junior curator at the Barbican Art Gallery, and I happened to have sort of this project. So it is actually very interesting. But anyway, so the foundation was created by John Mucha and also his mother, Geraldine Mucha. And ever since, we have been very active by making exhibitions, making publications, but the most important thing is to keep his legacy together, and also through these activities to communicate Mucha's idea, sharing with the new generation Mucha's legacy.
One thing I'd like to ask you all about, maybe going to Adrian first, is the importance of the sympathetic client in the work we've seen, because something we haven't mentioned very much, but most graphic design, most illustration depends on there being a client, various other intermediaries, sometimes just good luck. You get a combination that produces a good run, and of course Sutnar had a very good partner in this, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. There was a moment in, very hard to believe so now, but I think looking at contemporary America, but there was a moment, 50s and 60s, when there was a, we'll call it corporate enlightenment in relation to design. And so there was a lot of support for good design, and that evaporated, as we know, throughout the 70s, the 70s and 80s. Something interesting that I discovered about Sutnar was that actually he was quite irascible. He wasn't a smiley, friendly supplier to clients, and he fought for his own ideas, which sometimes, I'm sure many of you will know this, sometimes that works. Other times it doesn't, and I think it's telling. That he did find himself completely out of favour. But there's no question, John. All the great work in graphic communication is a coming together of a great client and a great supplier.
And Peter, what was Teige like working with commercial companies as an avowed Marxist? And
he didn't really do that.
No,
that's the thing. When you said client, I was thinking, well, how am I going to answer this?
Well, it's someone else.
Yeah, I mean, I think publishers for sure. Yeah. There were certain publishing houses that were simply sympathetic to the avant-garde, that maybe themselves were left-leaning, if not Marxist, and they basically, Teige was the obvious choice to do cover designs. In many cases, he was doing cover designs for his friends' books. So there's also that. There was a sense, not so much of sort of producing things and putting them out on the market and hoping somebody buys it, as simply being part of this community where everybody's sort of doing their part. I mean, I think it would be fascinating if some cultural historian did a kind of economic history of the avant-garde, how these people really supported themselves, because it's rather mysterious. But
it still is.
It still is, yeah. So, yeah, the idea of a kind of client relation, I don't think really applies to him in the way it might to certainly Sutnar, Šašek, well, the other, all four.
Well,
three of them.
I'm curious about it in relation to Mucha, because we know about Job cigarette papers.
Yes.
Without, I don't know anything about Mr. Job or whoever it was who actually got involved.
It was a commission, of course, and one of the earliest posters he created, but somehow it became a great hit, and becoming his iconic poster, obviously. But talking about commercial work, in fact, he liked, as a method, exploring his experiment, to develop his idea about communication, because his ultimate purpose is basically to do something big in order to unite, very seriously, Slavonic people for independence. So communication is always his the biggest and also the question of identity. This is also
Yes.
yeah,
It brings us back
identity.
to
Yes.
the exhibition
So
that's running here.
he was, even though for a job or whatever commercial posters in Paris, he was asserting his need for communication and also his inspiration and his identity by quietly wrapping female figures in sewed Czech or Slavonic folk costumes. And in that way, he was also integrating, again, a very not screaming way, but actually using line, as I said, leading people's eyes to various details. And then, oh, so this is actually mysterious, and this means, oh, this flower means this kind of thing. So all together, he was trying to make, whether it is a commercial poster or decorative panel, art poster, it doesn't matter. Asking viewers to read it.
Because go back to Šašek, who also found a home in Paris. You explained, Lukáš, that he was carrying this idea with him for a while. Has anyone been able to publish the earlier versions? Can you see the process behind it, or did it sort of just snap into place with that first book?
Well, I think it was actually in a pipeline to be published in this Czech publisher, but the communist takeover meant that all the private publishing was nationalized, and his actual friend and publisher was even put in prison. So I'm not sure if he even managed to get any of the proofs or anything like this. But he worked in Paris as a commercial graphic designer as well, so he was definitely up to date with kind of the latest trends, and definitely didn't make stuff isolated out of
And presumably understood the processes of print and how to make a book.
Absolutely, and that's why I think the book had such huge success internationally, because he wrote very little, and what he wrote was just so nice and witty, and he was just not trying to overwhelm anyone, and that's kind of the.
Did he have children that he could test this out on?
He was divorced 2 or 3 times, I think. Maybe visiting 18 different locations with spending every month there.
It's not conducive to family life.
Yeah, but yeah, he had a stepson. So, and I think he actually tasked him to illustrate some real detailed, intricate details in one of the books. So.
And do you know the story of how Rizzoli came to republish these? Was it?
Not sure. I just in the early 2000s, kind of the 60s fashion of illustration came back again. You could see lots of commercial.
Yes, as you say,
the cycle.
The cycle of fashion goes around all the time. I think it might be good to open this discussion up to the audience. Is there a burning question, or even just a nice question that you would like to ask to any of our 4 panelists here?
Thank you very much for all your talks. Amazing. I had a question around typography and how you thought your amazing people that you spoke about, I'm not going to try and pronounce their names, but how you thought they used typography, and if it's relevant to the era as well, so the fonts that were used within that era.
Who would like to? I can take that one.
Yeah, it's. I suppose we saw typography or lettering in all of the 4 presentations. Sutnar perhaps was more rooted in pure typography than the others. definitely there's a constructivist root in there. He absorbed all avant-garde. I think the last sentence in Stephen Heller's quote that the influence of abstraction. So he pushed letter forms not to never to illegibility, but he would push them as far as he could. But I think they clearly come from a constructivist source. Interesting, the similarity between Teige. For years I've called him Teige, so it's a real struggle to say Teige. But I thought his book covers could have been similar. I mean, they were interchangeable. But again, they would have that same constructivist root, I think. Do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think typography was an extremely important. I don't think it was an extremely important topic for Teige. And one that he took not simply as a sort of design question, but even as maybe philosophical is too deep. But he applied these same constructivist principles that would be applied to architecture to the idea of typography as well. So absolutely only sans serif type setting, because serif type fonts were decorative, bourgeois. In a lot of his book covers, he only used lowercase letters. And he, in fact, designed several complete fonts. He was very influenced by the Bauhaus. He wrote articles and essays, some of them quite detailed, about typography. So it's something he took very seriously, and absolutely there's a strong kinship between Sutnar and Teige on this front. They really took it seriously.
Well, in fact, Mucha's typography, which is rarely discussed, in fact. However, from our research, looking at his childhood, teenager, and throughout his professional life, typography is one of his greatest achievements. In fact, from his teenage time, he has been experimenting all by himself, not necessarily influenced by other people. Picking up probably from his environment and also his interest in particular line, he actually did really indeed look at this Medi as well as Sarah Bernard. One poster alone has got several different typography. It's all his invention. Honestly.
In terms of Šašek, you can see actually also in illustration, he recorded the typography, all written by hand, but it's there. If it's a Helvetica, if it's a serif font, it's there. Obviously, it has kind of the cute filter of guy making it by hand, but it's there. And all his books were set, I would say it's like a version of Helvetica, just like 1960s sans serif, and it works.
Thank you all so much. It's interesting to see the connections and their influence from the sort of urban landscape, the way that they capture and sort of reflect and shape it. And then thinking a little bit about maybe more specifically to shaping then interior towards like exhibition design. So I wondered in particular for Peter and Adrian, could you speak a little bit more about their work in exhibition design? I don't know how much, to what extent Teige was doing that, but Adrian, you mentioned that Sutnar was doing some exhibition design as well.
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned that I don't bring a scholarly approach to this. I can't quite give you the detail that you would probably like, but it was clear that he had that mentality that would apply himself to whatever task was facing him. And I think it was interesting that he seemed to have gone, as far as I can tell from just simply looking at the stuff, he seemed to have gone from stage design. Well, perhaps I think puppetry. It may well actually have started with puppetry. He was very interested in the art of puppetry, the puppets themselves and how they were staged. That probably lent, I'm guessing here, but that probably lent itself towards stage design, and stage design then became interior. But I think there was a feeling at that time, and you will know much more about this than I do, but there was a feeling that design wasn't the compartmentalized thing it is now.
It was Ernesto Rogers from A Spoon to the City.
Yeah.
As a kind of method of, as an approach to design.
I think if you were a designer, probably anywhere in the world, you had that freedom, which now is pretty much denied. You have to specialize. But perhaps you can expand a bit on.
Yeah, I mean, I think Teige didn't do much in terms of exhibition design per se. There's one famous example from the early 20s called the the Bazaar of Art, like that Devětsil as a group put together, and that Teige was very influential in putting together. It was clearly influenced by Dada again, although at that time Teige was explicitly very anti-Dada. He thought it was too negative. But, you know, Dada had these sort of crazy events in Prague a couple of years beforehand. Teige, who wrote about everything going on, never mentions them. But he did design, you know, help to design this Bazar Umění, Bazaar of Art, where they had things like, you know, playful things like a mirror that you'd walk in and you'd be confronted with, and underneath it said, "Your portrait, dear visitor," or ball bearings, you know, being put in your face as art objects, sort of, you know, Duchamp types of things like that. But otherwise, in terms of actual construction of sort of spaces, he left that to the architects. He was a theorist of architecture and interior design and everything, but he didn't practice it. But I completely agree with what you said about design for Teige and for sort of a lot of these people in these circles not being compartmentalized. It was not something that was a specialist sort of niche topic. It was part of everything, and he certainly thought of it that way. But yeah, he in terms of practice, he really did book covers. He did graphic design, sort of on a page, but not so much in space, even though architecture as a topic of scholarly interest or, you know, propaganda interest was key for him.
Yeah, just a quick sentence. I think also because these guys were rooted in art, they drew from modernist art. I think they felt that freedom to move between the various disciplines.
I think there's another hand. That's right, just there, gentleman there.
Thank you so much. I feel like almost everything I know about the Czech design canon I've learned in the last hour and a half. But I was wondering, is that the Czech design canon? Like in the UK, we have, you know, if you want to do graphic design that looks British, you know, you can draw on Gill, Johnston, maybe Blake, Saville, maybe Brodie, maybe Morris. But are these figures who figure into like contemporary Czech design as shortcuts for things looking Czech? Or has the upheaval of the 20th century meant that they're more forgotten? And is there a kind of like recognisably Czech style that is separate and that is different?
Well, I think if you haven't been to the exhibition yet, have you? No. So I think if you go to the exhibition, you'll learn a great deal. My friend Linda Krasnowska, who with Philip Blazek is one of the main architects behind the Identity Project, talks about type being Czech design's secret weapon. And there's been a great explosion, worldwide there's been a great explosion of digital type design over the last 30 years, which coincides with the post-communism era, the supposed end of history. And what we've seen is that type Czech design in particular, because maybe connected to the nature of the language, has really advanced in leaps and bounds. So there are several Czech type designers and type foundries that you can see displayed in this exhibition and learn about more online. But you are an actual Czech designer, Lucas. So you tell us what's exciting you. Who are the the figures we should all know about in contemporary Czech design?
Well, I've been in London for the last 11 years, so I think I'm not most up to date, but I would agree typography is really strong car in Czech design. We have Petra Type, which is from Briefcase Foundry. They're really good. I don't know how else to describe typography because I'm not, a typographer. But I think Czech book design is amazing, and just if you go to any kind of, I think Czechs are the most prolific readers in the world. It doesn't mean they are reading all high class literature. It's mostly like a holiday novels, but still the books are taken like a super important object. And when I just came to London and I saw people putting a teacup on a book, I was just like, that is sacrilege. And I think it's still there. The bookshops are just, even the most mundane book is beautifully designed, and the publishers know actually that if they invest a bit more into the production, that they might get more of a money back. So I would recommend going to the exhibition, which, as I learned a lot there as well. And yeah.
Thank you very much, Lukasz. Do we have another question? I saw a hand.
Lucas, Šašek's drawings are amazing. Is there an archive? Do original artworks exist as opposed to printed copies of various editions of the book?
Well, there's Miroslav Šašek Foundation in Prague, which I didn't visit. I don't actually know if they have a physical archive, but the books, you can buy the books. They are, they are not the most expensive on eBay. And
no, sure, I have a few, but it's just that interesting problem that if you're going to re-edition a book, can you re-edition it? Is there original artwork you can re-edition from, as opposed to simply very sophisticated photography of an already printed book?
I believe, based on the books I read, I showed at the last slide, there is actual archive, because they were showing unpublished illustrations. The Israeli checkpoint is one of them, so there is definitely archive, but I'm not sure if it's open to public. I feel like if you are, obviously you, Simon from the Eye, you can
I'm
definitely...
just going to use your name. Thank you.
No worries.
Certainly, so there are no more questions, so I think I would really like to thank you for the deep dive and inspirational, engaging discussion on the graphic design. I think everyone enjoyed. So if you can please join me in the round of applause for our distinguished panelists. Also, if you can mark your calendar on the June 3rd, we will continue in the series on the graphic design from the print to virtual. It will be high-power presentation of the contemporary trends of the graphic designs. I have 10 to 12 young graphic designers presenting it here, so please put it in the calendar. If you would like to see us a bit sooner, 1 week from today, we're going to have a book launch, The Last Peasant War, which was written by Peter Zusi colleague, Jakub Beneš, exploring kind of roots of populism in Central Europe, but we know it's not only about Central Europe, might stretch across the Atlantic or different directions as well. So you're welcome to join us, and as we mentioned a few times, the exhibitions are open at Vitrinka Gallery and Boda Gallery every week from Tuesday till Fridays. Be happy to see you there. And thank you once again for joining us, and thank you all.